The iPhone was released in 2007 after great anticipation. The first model is a remarkably simple thing. It has no app store and no front-facing camera. It is, Steve Jobs marketed, an iPhone with calling and messaging functionalities. Things that we see as standard nowadays were incredible when announced, such as the capacity of seeing the full internet or using your finger to control the device.
Sleep wake button, and there we go, right there. And to unlock the phone, I just take my finger and slide it across. Right? You want to see that again?
Lots of things have changed since 2007. Now, instead of being perceived as handy tools, they are perceived as dangerous, time-wasting devices that we aren't getting rid of only because we need them to contact our friends and families. The modern smartphone is designed to be soul-sucking. Unless one goes with the hardship of making it less addicting, one is stuck with a great temptation in their pockets. Of course, you could just buy a dumb phone, which is a type of phone which is meant to be simple and boring to use. The problem with the dumb phones is that as we get more and more advanced, having just a dumb phone becomes unfeasible. Let me give you an example. One day I had to go to my faculty's printer to print some papers for a project. The last time I went there, it was operated through coins. Now you have to download an app on your phone to create an account, to then choose the files to print, to then connect your credit card to the app, to then pay and have your papers printed. They complicated this entire process because people in my university don't use cash anymore. If I had a dumb phone in that situation, I wouldn't have been able to print those papers. The price you have to pay for minimalism and simplicity is exclusion. We use nowadays our phones for everything. They are used as cameras, as GPSs, as consoles, as MP3 players, as TVs, and as much more. This is why I don't find dumb phones to be a suitable solution, at least for me. They reduce the anxiety of having to use it well by eliminating various distractions, but in a world that is growing more and more towards dependency for the smartphone, it is a great risk to get rid of it. When buying any phone, there are certain pros and cons one has to deal with, and it is in one's own power to make the best use of the device, not the other way around. The problem is that we let them control us and let them use us instead of fighting back and reclaiming what's ours. Many modern technologies work in a way I like to call voluntary servitude. Social media apps, for instance, hook the user first by instilling a fear of missing out on friends and family's lives and the latest trends. They adapt the world around the user so that using their app becomes the easy option to stay connected. Then, when the user is hooked, they cannot escape from the hook because the app is too goddamn attractive. Even if their lives get worse and worse in part due to the social media, the fear of disconnecting and the allure of numbing your brain through doom-scrolling memes far exceeds the desire to escape. Without realizing it, they have become dependent on the social media. Social media and smartphones are not the only technologies which do this. Almost every important service developed on the 21st century follows this model. If you want to find a partner, it's Hinge or the highway. If you want to watch series legally, you either get 5 different streaming sites which are constantly having higher and higher prices and getting worse, or you go through the trouble of buying each series in a physical format. All of these technologies follow the law of least effort. The easier option is the option we will take even if it is not the best option. And yet these are not the worst examples. Artificial intelligence has been the rage of the moment. Its main purpose is to make life easier for the user. If you want to make a drawing or do an assignment or make music or make a computer program, you don't have to go through any effort because the AI will do it for you. It is so alluring for this exact reason. The main drawback of this is that the user never learns and never grows. If failure is life's greatest teacher, then the AI no-scopes her ass. Indeed, studies show that using AIs is slowly eroding our critical thinking skills. We are leaning toward a form of idiocracy, where slowly even thinking becomes too hard for us. So instead, we let the AI do it for us. And they are not entirely wrong. Why think for ourselves when we can just obey blindly the machine? The danger of this, aside from the fact that the machine can be, and is often, wrong, is that free thought is not exercised. And when free thought is not exercised, our freedom becomes an afterthought. First of all, we must ask ourselves, why is this happening? After multiple wars and revolutions, the systems of absolutism, of fascism, and of communism fell out of favor and were replaced by democracy. Democracy is an alluring promise. Nobody likes for their freedoms to be taken away. So a system where one's individual freedoms are maintained, and he is also responsible for the election of leaders and rulers, sounds like an ideal premise. The strength and weakness of democracy is also its foundation, the belief that not any individual in particular, but men in general have the power and reason to do what's best for society as a whole. This belief largely comes out of the Enlightenment. The idea that man is a rational creature and will do what's best for his other fellow men. Now, the main problem facing democracy is that this idea that man is a reasonable animal is not true. A quick glimpse into any psychology textbook will reveal that man is powered by unconscious, irrational forces that threaten reason. Plato warned of this danger in the Republic, where he compares democracy to a ship where everybody argues that he should be the one to steer while knowing nothing of steering, and in the end the ship ends up in turmoil. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, also claimed that ordinary men could not be entrusted to run a civilization because they would not be acting rationally. He warned that man had an inclination towards evil, which he called the thanatos or death drive. In Civilization and its Discontents, he says that society has to be against the autonomy of the individual to sustain itself, because otherwise the subconscious energies of the individual will tear down the safety of the group. The solution both men propose is a make-pretend democracy. Plato writes in the Republic that the best form of government is one where it is ruled by a cabal of elites which are philosopher kings. To make sure that the lower class does not question their social standing, Plato proposes a noble lie in which their standing is associated to a myth in which the gods have already chosen this social standing and as such have to accept it willingly. Similarly, Freud also says that democracy should be run by a group of elites who can control their unconscious forces and basically give the population the illusion of freedom while unconsciously nudging them towards how they want them to behave. Say you want to make the citizen pay more in healthcare through the foods they eat. If you were to just prohibit healthy foods altogether, perhaps they will start to complain and protest that their freedoms are being taken away. The better solution is to do this through offering more and more unhealthy foods through cheap prices, quick preparation times, and aggressive marketing campaigns. You make the unhealthy option easy and accessible, while the healthy option is hard and difficult in comparison. You normalize the belief that there is nothing wrong in eating unhealthy foods every once in a while. even if these foods have more in common with poison than with food. You also make nutritional information extremely complex, offering multiple guidelines and labels that are completely unintuitive. What happens is that people will want to willingly eat in an unhealthy manner. They will choose what you want them to choose, and they will think it's their own decision, as such not feeling that they have their freedom taken away. As Dostoevsky once wrote, the best way to keep a prisoner from escaping is to make sure he never knows he's in prison. You can see how this principle operates in the technologies I listed above. Through making the world around you need and use a smartphone, it becomes almost like suicide not choosing to have one. And by making AIs do everything easier and faster, it also proves to be a huge disadvantage choosing not to use them. The user is not forced by law to use an iPhone or ChatGPT, yet the way the user is constantly nudged towards them makes it almost impossible to function without one. And instead of designing these technologies for a moderate use, they are designed specifically towards addiction. The user is led towards abuse by having to go the extra mile to use the phone or the AI less. Modern democracy defines liberty as to do whatever one wants. Yet this is not true freedom. If one day I chose to stop using willpower and discipline and just let my mind do the first thing it pops to mind, I would just eat fast food, doom scroll, and jerk off until I died. I would technically be free because I am doing whatever I want, yet you wouldn't really call this a good exercise of my freedom. As Viktor Frankl wrote, freedom, however, is not the last word. Freedom is only part of the story and half of the truth. Freedom is but the negative aspect of the whole phenomenon, whose positive aspect is responsibleness. In fact, freedom is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsibleness. Turning back to Plato's Republic, he writes the story of a man who gains absolute power and freedom. Yet he writes that if he does not exercise this freedom with virtue, moderation, and responsibility, he is bound to become a slave of his own desires. Quote, "He who is the real tyrant, whatever man may think, is a real slave, and is obliged to practice the greatest adulation and servility, and to be the flatterer of the vilest of mankind. He has desires which he is utterly unable to satisfy, and has more wants than anyone, and is truly poor. If you know how to inspect the whole soul of him, all his life long he is beset with fear, and full of convulsions and distractions, even as the state which he resembles. And surely the resemblance holds. Moreover, he grows worse from having power. He becomes and is of necessity more jealous, more faithless, more unjust, more friendless, more impious than he was at first. He is a purveyor and cherisher of every sort of vice, and the consequence is that he is supremely miserable, and that he makes everybody else as miserable as himself. To become truly free is to practice constant self-control and restraint. But what modern society does is that it makes us free without training us to make good use of this freedom, instead leading us to misuse it and waste it, constantly striving towards cheap pleasures instead of lifelong satisfaction. The paradox is that we want to be free, but when we become free we want to be enslaved. So we choose to be slaves of the body, of others' opinions, of companies, and of ideologies. Jean-Paul Sartre writes that we are condemned to be free, and since we long for servitude, we strive towards a fixed identity. A waiter who thinks himself first as a waiter and then as a free human being who obeys his boss and follows his role without second thought is an example of what Sartre calls bad faith, that instead of acknowledging and accepting his freedom as a human being, the waiter runs away and finds refuge under the fixed role of being a waiter. But we have to wonder first, Why do we value freedom, but at the same time choose to be unfree? Why don't we take responsibility of our lives instead of running away from it and hiding behind systems to do the thinking for us? That, my friends, is where anxiety comes in. We live in an age defined by an intense and constant anxiety. Before we get into any specifics, it would be nice to define anxiety, as it is often misinterpreted. Anxiety is a mechanism your brain has to predict future outcomes and plan accordingly towards them. It is like an alarm bell, telling your brain to prevent you from future disaster. The thing about modern life is that it is filled with situations of anxiety. The news constantly reminds us that there are multiple problems in the horizon, and social media reminds us that we are constantly missing out on the latest trends. Though it would be easy to blame the spike in anxiety to the news or the phone, the truth is much more complicated. Anxiety is an innate part of the human condition, specifically in today's society where we have so many choices to pursue. Anxiety comes as a result of freedom, or as Soren Kierkegaard put it best, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. If you were to live in the Middle Ages, most of your life would have been decided for you. You had little say in the religion you had to follow, the man or woman you had to marry, the job you had to perform, or the social standing you found yourself. This made life very limited. But it saved the individual from doing most of the hard choices we face today. But today we have these choices to deal with and much more. Maturing nowadays is living more and more in freedom, and as such, having more anxiety. When you are conceived, you are literally dependent on another human being for survival. And when you are born, you need someone else to feed you and to take care of you. As we grow up, we start gaining more and more freedom to do whatever we want. We have the permission to be away more and more from our parents, and we have more control over our finances, our diet, and who we decide to hang out with. Previously, when faced with any problem, we always had our parents and our teachers to guide us. But as we grow older, we realize that even they can be wrong. So it is up to us, and only us, to decide which is the correct and incorrect way to live life. When we reach a certain age, we realize we are truly lost in the world, that everyone else is lost too, and that those who claim aren't lost are probably the most adrift. One way in which we limit our freedom in order to reduce anxiety is through following others. Being free means having a degree of isolation, and since humans are social animals, we naturally hate being against the group. The tests of Solomon Asch, for instance, prove that people are more inclined to conform to the group rather than telling their own truth. In these tests, a real person was filled in a room of actors, where all were shown a sequence of lines and told to say which was the longest line. The actors would knowingly say the incorrect answer collectively, and in most cases, the test subject, even if he internally knew he was right, would say the incorrect answer just to give in to peer pressure. This is why we see people who will form their opinion solely based on others. They will form their opinion of a series or a movie just based on their rating. They will choose what's important and what isn't important just based on the current zeitgeist. These people never think for themselves and rather act as automatons. They are the closest thing there is to real-life NPCs. If someone has the power to control what others say, one has attained complete control of how people think. Controlling people's opinion becomes a great tool for psychological manipulation. This has been done multiple times by the CIA. In the 1950s, Guatemala started a revolution against the USA's exploitation of its banana supply, which sought to establish a democratic government. The CIA modified the information that was being propagated so that the average citizen believed that the Guatemalan revolutionaries had connections to the Soviet Union and wanted to establish a base where it would be close to nuke the USA. Even if the revolutionaries never had any associations with communism, this was enough to gain public support on a large scale on the coup d'etat orchestrated by the CIA, which gained back control to America on its banana supply. From the Spanish-American War, which was started based on the lie that Spain had sunk an important American vessel that was then propagated by various news outlets, to the works of Jackson Pollock, which were sponsored by the CIA to make their paintings represent American freedom and make sure that America won the cultural war against the USSR. Governments have used our disposition of conformism to sway the public opinion for their needs and wants. This has become now increasingly dangerous thanks to the rise of algorithms and AIs. Algorithms now control what you see on your social media feed, and if you are what you constantly consume, then it is no exaggeration that the companies which control the algorithm can control the thinking of the population. If you were to make a large number of AIs all agreeing on each other and sway the algorithm in favor of an opinion, the user might note that something is off. But eventually, they'll adopt the position you want them to adopt and soon contribute to propagandizing the same opinion they think they have arrived on their own. The thinkers of the Enlightenment thought that the best way to structure education was to give the student opposing perspectives so that they could hear from both sides and make their own opinion based on such and such. But the way social media sites or AIs are structured makes them automatically agree on whatever you are thinking, because it is detrimental for it to give you the wider picture. It traps you into an echo chamber where you are recommended similar content. This is why we are seeing more than ever a large political polarization and a large gap between the left and the right. If this is how democracy is structured, then it is less of a democracy and more of a totalitarian state, but whose leader is hidden behind the shadows and whose doctrines are done subtly as to keep the illusion of liberty. This fear of isolation is one of the ways we saw arise in fascist ideologies in the 20th century. In a fascist ideology, people don't have to fear isolation because they are all working towards one common goal, the betterment of the state. They don't have to face anxiety because they don't have the power to make choices. In this way, fascism solves the main issue of democracy. Now that a dictator controls all, there is no need for petty political debates or idiots choosing idiots to run the government. The state is turned into a sort of divine being. The spectacles and grand marches are ways of worship and of aggrandizement of the state. Education under the fascist regime is about how one should obey the state under all means, how one is insignificant if it is not contributing to the state. The individual loses himself, the reverence of the nation, and becomes one with the cattle. Of course, the main drawback of fascism is that the people never have freedom and autonomy over themselves. Fascism is, by its very nature, an ideology which dehumanizes the population and sees them only as cogs in the machine. But the individual never feels this. Feels like he is part of something larger. In Germany, for instance, he is tied to the myth that, as a member of the Aryan, he is biologically superior to the rest of the races. He has to fight for the expansion of the country to fulfill his destiny as a German. Germany's domination of Europe is then no less different to Europe's colonization of Africa, where a state conquers not as a brutal expansion, but as following the rule of survival of the fittest that governs evolution. Hitler became the Führer because he could convince the German population that democracy was a failure, a sentiment further aggravated by the Weimar Republic and the Great Depression. As such, he could propose a system that remedied the problems of democracy and returned Germany again to a position of glory. These two systems, an autocracy disguised as a democracy and a full-on totalitarian state, basically yield the same results. The citizen willingly gives its freedom in exchange for a relief of loneliness and anxiety. But as I said previously, instead of running away from the responsibilities of freedom, we have to face them head on in order to live a life we can truly call our own. The main responsibility of being free entails having to be ourselves. Often this phrase, be yourself, is said as the end-all of problems. Yet there are a few things which need to be clarified. First of all, who is actually myself? If I were to ask you, who are you, you wouldn't really come with a strict definition. You could tell me your name, your likes and dislikes, your political affiliations, and your values, but that wouldn't really be a good enough descriptor as to how you are. These things are subject to change, and nothing is really static about your identity. The ship of Theseus is a nice metaphor for what identity is. Imagine a ship that gets its planks replaced over and over until none of the original planks remain. Is it then the same ship or a different one? When does the ship stop being the ship of Theseus? Is the essence of it being the ship of Theseus justify the fact that nothing but the name remains from the ship of Theseus? Similarly, our values and beliefs get replaced over time until we erode who we were before. Despite sharing many things, I cannot say I was the same person I was 5 or 10 years ago. Because many things have changed since then, not just biologically, but mentally. Many of my previously held beliefs have been destroyed and replaced by new ones. Being yourself is like trying to hold air. It is but a fleeting thing. Language is not a tool complex enough to label my existence at a T. I have so many wants, fears, desires, and hopes that not even the most complex of biographies could capture the essence of being me. The image we have of others will always be fundamentally flawed because what we know of them is only through our own filters. No matter how much we know a person, we cannot truly know that person. Based on this video, you can make an assumption of who I am, but even if you knew me in person, you will never know who I am solely because I am a changing being whose definition also changes along with it. This is why the phrase, be yourself, without further explanation is redundant. Which parts of myself are myself? Which of the 7 packs of wolves inside me should I feed? Which parts of my personality are flaws to be eradicated and which are actually hidden forces of strength? My interests range from philosophy to James Bond to insane anime to cis to furry romance webcomics. Trying to define my position in the political compass is like playing a roulette. My pronouns are going to be Cuz and Ino from now on because every day I be just gambling with my identity. In this, people will cling to a fixed identity like the waiter I mentioned previously. They will give themselves various labels and never stray away from them. They are like actors who have been assigned a certain role and as such cannot act out of them. They ignore conflicting values and beliefs and choose to be servants under their own judgment. Previously, I used to hate myself and as such tried to run away from who I was through imitation. I imitated exactly those characters who had the traits I sought. I imitated people who had great self-confidence because I lacked so myself. I imitated those fictional characters who did great deeds because I wanted to do such things myself. I imitated those heroes who thrived in isolation because I couldn't bear the loneliness. I stopped being myself, and yet I justified this by saying that I was just improving myself. Instead of accepting who I was, with all my flaws and defects, I ignored them and instead chose to run away. I longed for a fixed identity. I longed for bad faith. I wanted to find the answer of my identity on others. I think instead of saying be yourself, we should rather be saying this quote by Nietzsche. To become what one is, one must not have the faintest idea what one is. Identity is not something you develop in a few years, nor in a lifetime. Being yourself is choosing to accept that you are malleable. You can change from one moment to the next, and that is fine. Just like nature is in a constant state of change, going from one season to the next, so do we, as children of nature, shouldn't expect to ever find some identity to cling on to. The beauty of life is not found in its summit, but in its climb to reach the summit. In the end, life isn't some grand RPG game where you can customize your class, your stats, and your penis size. You are born in a place with a family and you have to adapt. Some are born in poverty, others are born rich. Some are blessed with high IQs, others are cursed with life-threatening diseases. Life is but a game of chance. I was talking previously with the assumption that men even have free will to begin with, that the choices you make are not based on a law of cause and effect you cannot change, but instead of your own free-thinking mind. But is this true? Do we truly have free will, or is it just an illusion? In other words, if we were to reset time from the beginning, would everything have happened the same? Would you still have clicked this video or watched until this point? Here I want to look at the science behind decision making. An experiment conducted by Benjamin Libet measured the brain activity when subjects were told to press a button if they felt like it. The results show that the brain activity of deciding to press the button or not came before the subject was even conscious of the decision made. Similar other experiments inspired by Libet show similar results where the subconscious decides for us. This shows that the brain already decides beforehand which decisions are to be made. In other words, the brain subconsciously chooses what the outcome of the decision is even before we consider the decision. Arthur Schopenhauer put it more bluntly by saying, "Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." In other words, we control what to follow, but not what we want to follow. If we take this at heart, then all previous talk is rendered meaningless. There is no point in fighting for our freedom or living in a democracy if no such thing as free will exists. We might as well just give up and let others do the thinking for us. Imagine if you had a vision of your future in 5 years in which you died of a heart attack. Then, nothing that you do will ever change that fate, even if you know it beforehand. In short, you have no free will to change this outcome. But the thing is that whether we have free will or not, literally does not matter. William James taught that we should act like we have free will even if the evidence points to the contrary, because just adopting defeat against fate is like giving up on having any sort of personal responsibility and instead adopting a victim's mentality and a defeatist's mindset. Instead, we should work within fate to make sure that it is the best it can possibly be. It's like hiking a trail where any deviation is locked off. We might not have the freedom to choose a different path, but the fun in the activity comes from not knowing what comes next. The one who complains that what's the point in hiking the trail if we cannot go wherever we please is missing the point. A novel, a movie, or a series doesn't lose its worth just because the ending has already been decided from the moment you start. Similarly, a life is rendered useless just because from our birth it has been decided how it will end. Just because it has started bad doesn't mean it has to end terrible. There's still a chance you can turn your life around. We might not be able to change our past, but we can decide what to do in our present to choose our future. You don't have to be a product of your environment or your genes. We don't know if we'll suffer a heart attack or not in the first 5 years, but we can reduce our chances through multiple ways. We can do cardio exercise, eat healthier meals, and have regular medical checkups. But even doing all this, we cannot be certain we will escape this fate. Death by cardiovascular disease is the single biggest cause of death in the world, killing on average one person every 34 seconds. Even if we do everything right, the statistics are always against us. This is why every action we take, everything we work towards, is always a gamble. There is no way to get to your goals that works 100% of the time. You can do everything right and even still never achieve your dreams. Similarly, you can just become successful through extraordinary luck without having never done anything. There will be some times where the odds will be struck against our favor, where factors we cannot control will threaten our hopes and dreams. But courage is gained not by giving up and letting our circumstances win, but by choosing to keep fighting regardless of what life throws at us. This is the part of the video where I reveal my true intentions. This was never about philosophy. This was always about gambling.
Gambling! Aw, dang it. Aw, dang it. All my fellas. All my fellas. All my fellas. All my fellas. Let's go.
Life is like a poker table. You cannot control the cards you are dealt, but you can control how you play these cards. A good poker player is not determined by chance, rather he accepts chance and tries to make the best use he can with it. This is similar to the philosophy of stoicism, which teaches that we shouldn't focus on external things we cannot control. Instead, all of our attention and energy should go to the things we can control. As Epictetus writes, we cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how to respond to them. This is why, as long as we don't let external events determine us, we will always be free. This truth is exemplified in the case of Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychologist who was sent to the Auschwitz concentration camp. He had all his belongings taken away from him and he was separated from his wife and his family. He was forced to endure intense work hours with little food or sleep. Yet, Frankl, instead of falling into despair like most of his inmates, chose to maintain his humanity. In his now famous text, Man's Search for Meaning, he writes, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." He did not condemn his fate, but instead took advantage of it. He did not see the concentration camps he was put in as a punishment, but rather chose to see it as an experience to learn firsthand this nature of suffering of humanity, which he would then teach to other people to ease their pain and suffering. We should not seek meaningless pain, but if such a thing rings at our doorstep, it is our responsibility to make the best use of it. This gives us perhaps the greatest freedom of them all, to decide how to act in the present moment. I have previously said that life is a constant chain of cause and effect, but that doesn't mean we have to be passive in life. We can create new causes, which make new effects, which then lead to new causes, and so on and so forth. If we gain a sense of self based on previous experiences, we can determine a new self by doing new experiences and acting how we would like to act. Will Durant, speaking about Aristotle, said it best when he wrote that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. It is not just saying who you want to be. You have to put in the work to make that self a reality. This is precisely what Sartre was referring to as a solution for being lost. He quoted the famous line that for man, existence precedes essence. This line means that we are born without any clear purpose or goal in life. A chair is made with the purpose of being a chair. Nobody goes out of their way to decide to make a chair and then end up making a desk. Such a thing would be considered a grave mistake. For the chair, essence, the function of the object, precedes existence, the object itself. But since we have it backwards, we have no clear essence. This is why Sartre wrote that instead of seeking a fixed function, we should instead embrace the uncertainty that comes ingrained in all humanity. Each of our lives is different, so it is pointless to travel to a road that many have already gone past. Instead, we have to go through a path that no one else has walked through. We have to fight battles nobody has ever faced before. We have to see anxiety and discomfort not as enemies, but as proof that we are living lives truly our own. It is useful to learn from wisdom of previous men, but don't let that wisdom dictate your life, because those teachings and those sayings apply to them in their time. Maybe they don't apply to you, and that's fine. See philosophy and religion not as guidelines to strictly follow, but as a toolkit, taking what serves you from each and leaving the rest inside. We have the opportunity, more than any other human being before us, to exercise individuality. Our genes and our past experiences are all written in ink, so these cannot be changed, but our futures are not yet written. It is time for us to reclaim the pen from those who want us to be slaves and start writing a story which, in our last moments, we can truly say it was of our own making.